let's get into the Sasha Banks news, man, because honestly, there was nothing on Monday Night Raw that really was interesting at all, like usual on Monday night. Sasha Banks and Naomi, apparently, as the story goes, they left the arena, they dropped the titles on John Laurinaitis' desk, right, the tag team titles, and they walked out of the building. And then WWE, they had to change what was announced at the top of the 8 o'clock hour. They had a six-pack challenge, right? Six-pack challenge was announced, and then all of a sudden we started hearing news that they walked out. And then in the middle of the show, Becky Lynch and Adam Pearce have a segment, and Becky Lynch pitched, apparently, to wrestle Asuka in the main event to fill in for what was not going to be a six-pack challenge. Now, when the news broke, you would expect to read and find out that, oh, well, WWE had a six-pack challenge. They changed it during the live show. And Sasha Banks and Naomi, the way that it all transpired, you would think that they had walked out around 7 o'clock, 7:30, even then, or walked out during the middle of the fucking show while the show was live on the USA Network, or at least closer to the top of the 8 o'clock hour. Today, there was news from a friend of Sasha Banks and Naomi that now confirms that they left hours before Monday Night Raw last week, before their match was advertised. So the fallout is continuing with this ever-growing saga of Sasha Banks and Naomi walking out of last week's Monday Night Raw due to creative differences with Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard. In WWE statement issued on the night of the situation, they stated Banks and Naomi walked into head of talent relations John Laurinaitis, people power. Johnny Laurinaitis' office, with their suitcases in hand, placed their tag team titles on his desk and walked out during the show. WWE also claimed in the statement that Banks and Naomi were uncomfortable with two of their opponents in the six-pack challenge, as well as feeling disrespected as champions. Now, being disrespected as champions and feeling disrespected as champions is the only truthful statement in that entire situation. Banks and Naomi were not uncomfortable with anybody in that match. They've been in the ring with all of those women at some point or another. That was just WWE's way of burying them and making them look like fools live on air for what they did. However, a friend of Naomi and Sasha Banks mentioned on Twitter today that both were gone by the time that the rundown sheet was just printed for the show, implying that WWE had plenty of time to change the format of Raw without issue. Now, I don't know if you guys think that's a big deal or not, but I find it to be a big hiccup in WWE's side of the story here. So we watch the show, and we all are watching, and they're changing the main event on the fly during the show, and we're thinking that Sasha and Naomi had just left the building right at the start of Monday Night Raw. But this guy, the same guy, Adidas, on Twitter, mentioned that they had left hours before Raw was even live on the USA Network, and left hours before an official run sheet was even printed for the show. So WWE had all this time to change the match for Monday Night Raw last week, and they did not change the match. Now, granted, the reports during the week stated that Vince McMahon had no idea that Sasha Banks and Naomi had even left the building until around the start of the show, when he finally got word from his fucking circus of managers backstage. So I get that part, but my goodness, man, you are burying both of them because somebody clearly did not do their job. Like I said, this is all now becoming a smear campaign against Sasha Banks. Johnny People Power clearly fucked up because he knew that they had left. If they left hours before the show even started and threw their belts on his desk hours before the show, John Laurinaitis purposely withheld that information from Vince McMahon and Bruce Prichard and everybody else in management to purposely make them look bad. John Laurinaitis is an absolute fucking dick rider for Vince McMahon. He is an absolute fucking cocksucker to the boss. You don't think that this man on a normal day is going to go back to Vince McMahon and get in his ear about something? He's already standing there with his fucking pants hanging down in front of Vince McMahon. But on this night, he opts not to tell anybody, not anybody, that it would get back to Vince McMahon in a timely fashion, and then they could change all these hours that they had, change the main event match for Monday Night Raw. Instead, they purposefully left the main event the way it was advertised, and then WWE wants to go on air and tell everybody that Sasha Banks and Naomi were unprofessional. They had the balls to tell everybody that Sasha Banks and Naomi were unprofessional on Monday Night Raw. Wow! Oh my God! You can't be fucking serious. This is why I said last night, whatever WWE's side of the story is, it's no side to the story. The only side that we give a shit about and the only side that really matters is Sasha Banks and Naomi. WWE had the fucking balls to say that both of those women were unprofessional. Meanwhile, everything I just told you about this situation and this revelation from Sasha and Naomi's close personal friend is the very definition of unprofessional. Wow. It is fucking amazing, man. The more I hear about this shit it's comedy. It's a fucking comedy show. Seriously. That's what it has divulged into. So then there was a report that WWE has zero plans for Sasha and Naomi to return. There are no plans for Sasha Banks and Naomi. Brian Alvarez reported this on the Wrestling Observer Live, and he says this in regards to Sasha Banks and Naomi creative plans. Alvarez says, and I quote, "Perhaps you missed what they announced on SmackDown. They, meaning Sasha and Naomi, have let you down. Millions of fans let down when they walked out of Monday Night Raw on Monday. I think collectively as a fan base, we were all let down by the fucking terrible show that we got on Monday night. They have, in fact, been stripped of the women's tag team titles, and they've been suspended indefinitely. WWE apparently does not expect them back anytime soon because they are no longer figured into creative plans. Ringside News then reported that while no official mandate has been handed down, creative is no longer pitching ideas for Banks and Naomi, and the feeling is that it is pretty obvious to everyone that they are gone. Originally, Banks was scheduled to face Ronda Rousey for the SmackDown Women's Championship, and Naomi was scheduled to wrestle Bianca Belair at Hell in a Cell for the Raw Women's Championship. Brian Alvarez then confirmed Ringside News' report about creative not working on anything for them right now. He said they, right now, are at a point where they have zero plans for them to return. There is zero talk whatsoever about the two of them as it pertains to creative. So when they stripped Sasha Banks and Naomi, Michael Cole was told to advertise a future tag team women's tournament that will be going down in the weeks to come. But everybody, including me, I've been saying this since the titles have been fucking born, that this was a waste of fucking time. WWE now is going to be forced to give us a tournament since they now sold us on the fact that they're going to crown new tag team champions with a fucking tournament. Brian Alvarez noted this aspect on Wrestling Observer Live, and he said that WWE is planning to bring in teams from NXT to fill the tournament. He says, and I quote, "They have sent word down to NXT to think about some women that might be able to be a team. That's where they are right now. So you might see Casey and Caden get called up because we need teams. Alvarez pointed out how WWE hasn't put a lot of focus on the division, and they only have a couple of actual teams. They have 2 teams on the main roster, none of which are actual teams. Doudrop and Nikki Ash, Shayna Baszler, and Natalya. That is it. That is all they have on the Carmella and Zelina, but they broke up twice already. Nobody's going to want to see them get back together. There's legitimately no other fucking teams on the main roster. Alvarez speculated that the NXT teams would only be used for the tournaments and would not officially be part of the main roster. So what's the point of having NXT tag team champions, women's tag team champions on Tuesday night if you're only going to call up the fucking tag teams in NXT to compete in a tournament for the other set of tag team championships? Why do we have women's tag team champions on NXT if this is what we're doing? Why don't we call up everybody from NXT, get them involved here, get rid of the NXT tag team championships, which, you know, we always say that the women's tag team titles on the main roster don't make any sense. The NXT tag team championships are right there as far as the women's tag team championships are concerned. None of them are necessary. They're both paperweights. Both sets of titles are huge paperweights. Why don't we just get rid of the NXT tag team championships and have the original concept of the main WWE tag team championships for the women float between Monday, Friday, and NXT 2.0? I don't understand what's so difficult about making a level-headed decision such as that. WWE doesn't give a shit about tag team women's wrestling. Why are we even entertaining the thought of a fucking tournament? My God, how stupid can you be? Get rid of the titles. That's all I have to say about that. Nobody wants them. Nobody cares. And you're going to make yourself look like a bunch of fucking fools if you try and book a tournament with barely any fucking teams. And if you got NXT teams in there, it's going to go off and fucking bomb like usual. Does anybody else remember the Queen's Crown tournament? Do you fucking trust these people to run a women's tag team tournament? They'll run through it in record time, just like they did the Queen's Crown tournament. Nobody gives a shit. You, me, WWE, Vince, Bruce, Johnny Ace. Nobody gives a shit. Just fucking burn the titles and be done with it. But I find it very, very funny how WWE clearly knew that they left at the hour that they did, well before Monday Night Raw even went live, well before that there was even a fucking run sheet for what was happening on the show. And they let the show happen with the advertised six-pack challenge, only to then embarrass Sasha Banks and Naomi, claiming that they were unprofessional. But WWE knew ahead of time. Everybody knew ahead of time. It just didn't get back to Vince McMahon. The people who fucking write this show knew that they weren't there. The people who approved the fucking show knew they weren't there. Yet you go on air live on Monday night and claim that they're both unprofessional. Meanwhile, WWE showed you how unprofessional they really are in what I deem the Sasha Banks smear campaign. This is all petty bullshit, and there's only one side of the story, and it's not WWE's.